The American mall is dying, and what it's being replaced with is arguably worse. Over the last several decades, American malls have seen a sharp decline in occupancy rates from major retailers and a decline in attendance from shoppers. People just are choosing not to drive there, not to waste their time. And so these malls become hulls of concrete in a proverbial suburban ocean, left adrift without anyone to take care of them. Hello everyone, my name is Imre. You're watching Uniquely Unseen, where I talk about urbanism, accessibility, and public transportation. If you enjoyed today's piece, please don't forget to leave a like and tell me what you think in the comments down below. Let's get into it. The loss of a mall to the average American town or county means two things: a loss of millions of dollars in commercial taxable revenue, and two, the gaining of an eyesore that they have to do something with. On paper, the one saving grace for these local governments is that malls and the lots they sit on, housing hundreds of parking spaces too many, they're great candidates for infill development. Infill development is when you take a lot that has been disused or otherwise abandoned, say an abandoned mall or a church or a factory or even a brown lot, and you turn that into something that is usable, like a commercial space or a multi-use development with apartments and shops and maybe a park. Now, several American communities have decided to go this route of turning them into little islands of walkability, little havens of good development. While many of these projects look good to local governments due to the increase in housing stock and the increased tax base from having nothing to something in terms of commercial businesses, the reality is that it highly depends on local factors whether the project is a white elephant or something that actually generates revenue. The reason I say that is because for the vast majority of American cities, they are car dependent as a rule. And so residents choosing to live here will have a nice walkable island inside of their community of maybe 200 units. But outside of that, if reliable and effective public transportation cannot be provided to residents and the surrounding community, it leads to the amount of land you can actually redevelop off of a given lot to diminish. If everyone needs a car, you're still going to need to retain parking, especially if you want people to shop there from outside of the community. The more adequate public transportation can be provided to a given walkable community, the less a developer needs to worry about parking lot spaces, and the less residents need to worry about spending $12,000 a year on a car they will barely use. While cities across North America are redeveloping their malls, from Columbia, South Carolina, to Indianapolis, Indiana, to London, Ontario, and beyond, they run a real risk of falling into a bad spiral. And the spiral is what I'm going to dub the laser pig urbanism loop. I may have taken some creative liberties from his loop about Russian tanks, but hear me out here, okay? Hear me out. Here's how this generally goes. A city has a lot they need to redevelop. People like the idea of a walkable community or a quote-unquote outdoor mall, so it's a win-win on paper. A developer brings together some urban planning nerds and engineers who know how math works, and they define a proposal for a multi-use development project that requires just a little bit of parking removal. It's all it requires. Local government comes back and cites parking minimums as a reason why the project cannot go forward. And no, they won't give you a waiver. Less land for development means on the chance this actually gets built, there needs to be higher rent charged to tenants. The project ultimately gets built as some kind of outdoor mall plus housing hybrid, and residents still need a car in order to access the rest of the city they live around, in order to, leave their community. As a result, businesses and residents choose to lease elsewhere, and we're back to square one. I know that my perspective as somebody who's had to live car-free his whole life is a little bit different to the norm. Walkability is just what I expect and what I need, so I'm prepared to pay the higher rent it takes to make that happen. But in that vein, what I don't quite understand is why you would pay for the higher rent if there's no public transportation, or if you still need to own a car. Why not just downsize where you are from 2 cars to 1? Why not try to find a way to bike to a grocery store where you're living? Unless you have a very high-paid remote job, I would imagine the cost of a inflated apartment for the privilege of living in a walkable, new luxury development and paying for car insurance is not cheap. On some level, moving out to a place like Milwaukee in Wisconsin seems to be a cheaper alternative to paying above market rent and a car payment and potentially higher costs on consumer goods in your little walkable community. Another factor to consider is that infill development costs a lot of money. Whether we're talking about a factory complex or a military base or a mall, you're dealing with structures that need to be reimagined. And in the case of a factory or a military base, that's relatively simple. You can gut the factory of its machine parts and do some interior design work and get that all nice and ready for sale. You can take a military base, turn the barracks into townhomes after you remove the metric ton of mold in every barrack, and then sell the PX off to a grocery store, and you've got something of a town going. When you're looking at a mall, this is a space purely designed for retail, purely designed in an era of car-oriented development. And so you can either gut the thing, as is happening in Indianapolis, or you can demolish it, which is what's happening in Columbia. I don't want to make a value judgment on either project. I think both likely have a lot of merit, and both are better than what was there. However, I do want to focus on why cost doesn't matter as much as people think it does. The Indianapolis project is going to cost $600 million, but look at what you're getting. A mix of commercial and residential units that will potentially outlive the people who built it, that will continue to make a profit as long as there are residents to fuel the small businesses and larger businesses whom will call the commercial spaces home. What I hope these infill developments can provide the communities where they live, whether we're talking Columbia, Indianapolis, London, Toronto, wherever, is not just an economic benefit. I hope they can also help to provide social harmony and community, and a real sense that there is an alternative to car-centric sprawl. These communities don't have to be islands. They can really serve as a model for how you should be developing the outer rings of our communities into multi-use, bike-friendly, walkable areas. Low-density suburban-style zoning is a failure. We know that it is a failure. From every metric, people's health outcomes are getting worse. Economically, shackling people to a car payment doesn't help them. Socially, it makes people isolated. America has very few third places. The city of Houston, in classic Texas fashion, has relied on highways and low-density development. Recently, they announced the financial state of their city is poor because who knew? Low-density development isn't profitable, isn't economically sustainable, or even self-sufficient. And yet, this is how the majority of the country has operated. I think it really behooves the communities who can to densify as a rule, to think of multi-use development not as something you infill when a mall goes bust. Rather, it's something that should just exist as a normal part of our fabric in urban and suburban spaces. The people who go into public service from the local, state, and federal level don't just do it because of the pension. They do it because they really want to serve their community or nation and see it thrive and see it change. They want to be part of how the government runs, and if all they hear is negativity when it comes to multi-use development, that's what they have to act on. They need positive endorsement, positive feedback, answers to their questions on why these things matter, answers to how it will benefit them, not just socially or environmentally, why it will benefit them economically. We can't just say it's beneficial, we need data, and we have data. these officials just need to see that data and see it bear fruit, not just in one small community, but indeed across the region. I think if more people become engaged in state and local politics, that will be a lot better and will lead to better outcomes in our communities. We can change 70 years of bad policy. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoy it, please send it off to somebody you think would enjoy it as well. I'm Imre, and I'll see you in the next one.